So why exactly has his conviction, Bill Cosby's conviction, collapsed? Joseph Kotrie-Monson is a sexual offences specialist at the Fleet Street law firm Mary Monson Solicitors and a criminal lawyer. I asked him how Bill Cosby has come to walk free.
It's very interesting because although the general background is well known, Dotun, it may be useful, first of all, to remind ourselves of it quickly here. And of course, Mr. Cosby was accused by former basketball player Andrea Constant of drugging and sexually assaulting her. Now, this was initially investigated criminally by prosecutor Bruce Castor. And listeners may remember his quite rambling and widely panned defense of Donald Trump in those impeachment proceedings a few months ago. Now, a decision in the Cosby investigation was made because of lack of evidence that they wouldn't be able to secure a conviction. And remember, Dotton, the standard of proof in the US, as in the UK in criminal proceedings, is beyond reasonable doubt. However, once Mr. Cosby had that assurance, he could be forced to testify in civil proceedings that Miss Constant then brought and be compelled to answer. No choice as to non-cooperation. Now, he, of course, did so and, in fact, made admissions to so drugging her, etc., in those proceedings. And then a couple of years later, as the Me Too movement was reaching a crescendo, if you like, in the US, different prosecutors from the same office decided to go again criminally. But now, of course, remember, they had now this admission of guilt in those civil proceedings, and that meant that they felt that they had evidence which would get them over the line in the criminal proceedings. And of course it did. Dotton, and it's a horrific and calamitous but that the fact that a previous agreement with that state prosecutor predating these proceedings had been ignored, and prosecutors took this, some might say, illegitimate second bite of the cherry, which is exactly how the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania have phrased it. Now, that is sadly a textbook example of an abuse of the court's process, as we call it in the UK. I think they use the phrase process violation in US legal speak. There are some violations. There are some things that a state should not do in prosecuting that are so egregious that it renders the whole proceedings utterly unfair. And the argument of the defence, the argument with which 4 to 3 of the Supreme Court justices, state Supreme Court justices agreed, was that it's such an egregious level that the integrity of the proceedings at the most basic level cannot be regarded to be adequate.
So are we essentially, is this court then concluding in the United States that Bill Cosby shouldn't have served the 2 years of his 3 to 10 year sentence that he's already served?
Yes, and in fact, they've barred future proceedings in this matter against him. And of course, we've had, Dotton, some less flagrant examples, perhaps, of the state making promises and not abiding by them in the UK. And listeners may remember that prosecutions of IRA suspects in recent years after they had received assurances in letter form from the UK government, I think in the context of the Good Friday Agreement back in the 90s, well, those prosecutions failed for similar reasons. The dilemma now, and perhaps the source of major embarrassment and hopefully soul-searching among prosecutors in Pennsylvania, is that Mr. Cosby, in the context of the existence of the Statute of Limitations, which bars proceedings in cases such as rape or sexual offences after a certain number of years. Well, those have timed out on many other alleged victims' cases, and that means that Cosby remains in US law an innocent man. And in respect of this criminal complaint, it is absolutely the end of the road for the Pennsylvania State's Attorney's Office.
And you're saying this could happen even here in the UK in terms of sexual assault cases?
Well, In respect of sexual assault cases, it's very important to point out that we don't have a statute of limitations. Cases can only be barred where the defendant is so disadvantaged as a result of delay by not being able to remember events, perhaps if they're 50 or 60 years in the past. That's the type of case law that they can't defend themselves. As far as an abuse of process is concerned, which in UK law is tremendously difficult to show, judges will be very reluctant to stay proceedings on the basis of bad prosecutorial conduct. The mechanism exists to stop proceedings, but it's rarely used. I have to say, in this context, it's not the fact that this could happen again, or it's not the fact that this was ever particularly likely. And in fact, Dotun, the Supreme Court made the Pennsylvania Supreme Court made a special mention of the fact that this was tremendously unusual, because really this kind of unholy trinity of first criminal proceedings or first criminal investigation, the letter, that's opening the door to civil proceedings, and the civil proceedings outcome then being used to form a new prosecution. One must imagine that is a tremendously rare occurrence, which must be lubricated heavily with some serious prosecutorial arrogance and stupidity.
I know from the little I know about the law is that there is a difference between the law, or there's a subtle difference at least, between the law and the application of the law. And I wonder whether the ramifications from this application of the law are far-reaching. I mean, in the one instance, just a point of order, for me as a journalist, do I now describe Bill Cosby as a man who is, innocent of any charges, or do I describe him as somebody who is a convicted sex offender? I don't know.
I guess that's why this case is both troubling and I guess academically interesting from a legal point of view, because on the one hand, the evidence appears to be there. In English law, the evidence would be there to prosecute this man on the basis of many offences, because we don't have that statute of limitations. In US law, the answer is no, and it's precluded on that basis. Of course, there is a distinction to be drawn between the laws that regulate what people can say about people on the basis of libel, as opposed to whether somebody is a convicted criminal or not. The reality of it is that all eyes should be on these prosecutors, these bungling prosecutors who brought with a great level of hubris this prosecution in the first place, and perhaps when they should have been looking at different ways in which they might prosecute this man.
Isn't the real first instance issue the fact that this case was brought to a civil court before it was brought to a criminal court? Isn't that where the problem lies?
Well, and sometimes that happens. And of course, one wonders when cases come out in newspapers and on Twitter before they're reported to the police about what motivations might be. But this was a case that was investigated criminally. So it looks absolutely as if Miss Constant did the right thing and was disappointed by the prosecutor, Mr. Caster, who said that there was no way of proceeding because there wasn't sufficient evidence. Then it morphs into civil proceedings. And then it ends up becoming criminal proceedings. It's most unsatisfactory, seriously troubling, and prosecutorially massively sneaky. There won't be a lawyer who reads this who disagrees with the outcome, despite the fact that most of those, one would hope and expect, in fact, would be deeply troubled, given what we know about the number of allegations made against this man.
Yeah, Joseph Kotrie-Monson there from the Fleet Street law firm Mary Monson Solicitors, explaining why Bill Cosby is free now.